The last hurricane came in crooked, trailing smoke from its engine cowling like a wounded bird dragging a broken wing. Flight Sergeant Thomas Marsh stood at the edge of the grass and counted the returning aircraft for the third time, hoping the number would change. It did not. 5 went up. 3 came back. Somewhere over the English Channel, 2 more pilots had joined the growing list of names that nobody wanted to read aloud at morning briefings anymore. Tommy watched the smoking hurricane touch down hard, bounce once, then settle onto the grass with its propeller windmilling to a stop. The pilot, a young Scotsman named Jamie Ferris, sat motionless in the cockpit for a long moment before pushing back his canopy. When he finally climbed out, his face was the color of old paper. He pulled off his flying helmet and threw it against the fuselage hard enough to dent the fabric covering. "They came down through us like we were standing still," Jamie said to no one in particular. "Peterson and Whitmore never had a chance. The bastards just climbed right over us and picked them off." Tommy had been working on hurricanes since the first ones arrived at Hornchurch in March 1939. He knew every rivet, every cable, every temperamental quirk of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. He also knew what Jamie was describing, because he had heard the same story from a dozen pilots over the past 3 weeks. The German Messerschmitt Bf-109s operated at heights the hurricanes could not reach. They waited at 25,000 feet like patient executioners, then dove on the British fighters from above. When the RAF pilots tried to climb and meet them, their engines strained and their propellers lost efficiency. The 109 simply pulled away, circled around, and attacked again from a position of advantage. The problem was not courage. British pilots had plenty of that. The problem was machinery. That evening, Tommy sat in the dispersal hut nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The pilots had gone to the officers' mess, where they would drink too much and try to forget the faces of the men who would not be drinking with them. The ground crews had finished their work and retreated to their billets. Tommy remained alone, staring at a technical manual spread open on the table before him. The de Havilland 3-blade propeller fitted to every Hurricane in Fighter Command had 2 pitch settings, fine for takeoff and coarse for cruising and combat. Switching between them was like driving a car with only first gear and fourth gear. Fine pitch let the engine spin freely for maximum power during takeoff, but in a climb, the engine overrevved and risked damage. Coarse pitch was efficient at altitude, but it strangled the engine during the critical moments when a pilot needed to gain height quickly. The Bf-109, by contrast, had a constant speed propeller that automatically adjusted its blade angle to match conditions. The German pilots could climb, dive, and maneuver without ever thinking about their propeller settings. Tommy turned the page and studied the diagram of the de Havilland propeller mechanism. The parts for constant speed operation were already there, built into the design. All that was missing was a governor, a small hydraulic device that would sense engine speed and adjust the pitch automatically. The modification could be done. He was certain of it. But no authorization had come from the Air Ministry. The paperwork was stuck in some office in London, being reviewed by men who had never flown a combat mission in their lives. The door opened and a civilian in a rumpled suit stepped inside. Tommy recognized him immediately. Edwin Parrish was a de Havilland engineer who had been visiting squadrons across southern England, supposedly conducting routine inspections. But Tommy had seen him spending long hours examining propeller assemblies and asking questions that went far beyond routine. "Still here?" Edwin asked, settling into the chair across from Tommy. "Still trying to understand why we're sending men up in machines that can't do the job." Edwin glanced at the open manual. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. "You figured it out, then? The conversion. It can be done, can't it?" Edwin was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the evening wind carried the distant rumble of engines as the station's night patrol prepared for takeoff. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It can be done in 36 hours. I have the parts. I have the knowledge. What I don't have is permission." Tommy closed the manual. How many more men have to die before permission comes through? The question hung between them like a weight neither could lift. Then Edwin reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook filled with handwritten calculations. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that," he said. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the dispersal hut, the first hurricane of the night patrol roared into the sky. Tommy listened to the engine note fade into the distance and made a decision that would either save lives or end his career. "Show me what we need to do." The hangar smelled of engine oil and fear. Tommy worked by the dim glow of a single torch wrapped in cloth, its light barely enough to see the bolts he was loosening. Beside him, Edwin Parrish held the propeller blade steady while Tommy disconnected the pitch control linkage. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on June 17th, and they had exactly 31 hours left to complete something that had never been done outside a factory. They had chosen Hurricane L-1842, assigned to Flight Lieutenant David Stone, because it was scheduled for a routine engine inspection. The aircraft would not be missed for 2 days. If they failed, Tommy could claim he discovered a fault during maintenance. If they succeeded, everything would change. Edwin had smuggled the governor mechanism out of the de Havilland factory at Hatfield, hidden beneath sample parts in the boot of his car. The small hydraulic device weighed less than 2 pounds, but it represented months of engineering development that the Air Ministry had not yet approved for operational use. Installing it without authorization was a court-martial offense. Neither man had spoken about this directly. They did not need to. The first 6 hours went smoothly. They removed the propeller assembly, modified the hub mechanism to accept the governor, and installed new oil lines that would provide hydraulic pressure to the pitch control system. Tommy's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. He had trained as an apprentice fitter during the last war, too young to fight but old enough to learn. Every skill he had developed over 20 years had led to this moment. At noon, Edwin went to the mess hall and brought back sandwiches and tea. They ate quickly, standing beside the aircraft, not wanting to waste a minute. Outside, the airfield was alive with activity. Pilots briefed for the afternoon patrol. Ground crews loaded ammunition belts. Somewhere beyond the channel, German bombers were forming up for another raid on British shipping. "My brother was a pilot," Edwin said quietly. "Posted to France with 85 Squadron. His Hurricane went down near Amiens 2 weeks ago. No word since." Tommy did not know what to say. He had seen the same hollow expression on the faces of mechanics, pilots, officers, and clerks throughout the station. The war was only 6 weeks old, and already it had carved pieces out of everyone it touched. "This won't bring him back," Tommy said finally. "No. But it might keep other brothers from going the same way." They returned to work. The crisis came at 8 o'clock that evening. Tommy was underneath the engine cowling, connecting the last of the oil lines, when he heard footsteps on the hangar floor. He froze. Through a gap in the cowling, he saw polished shoes and the pressed trousers of an officer's uniform. Flight Lieutenant Harold Burton, the station's senior engineering officer, had arrived for an unscheduled inspection. Edwin stepped forward immediately, positioning himself between Burton and the aircraft. Tommy heard their voices but could not make out the words. His heart hammered against his ribs. If Burton looked closely at the engine, he would see the unauthorized modifications instantly. Tommy's career would end tonight, and worse, the conversion would never be completed. The conversation lasted 3 eternal minutes. Then the footsteps retreated. The hangar door closed. Tommy allowed himself to breathe. "What did you tell him?" he whispered when Edwin returned. "That I'm conducting stress tests on the propeller assembly per factory specifications." He wanted to see the paperwork. "I told him it was in my car and offered to fetch it. He said he'd check back tomorrow." Edwin's hands were trembling. "We need to finish tonight. No more time." They worked through the darkness. At midnight, Tommy connected the governor to the propeller mechanism and began the delicate process of calibration. The pitch had to change smoothly across the full range of engine speeds. Too fast, and the engine would surge dangerously. Too slow, and the advantage would be lost. By 4 in the morning, the installation was complete. They started the engine with the throttle at idle, keeping the noise as low as possible. The propeller blades turned slowly, catching the first gray light of dawn. Tommy watched the pitch indicator on the instrument panel. As he increased the throttle, the needle moved smoothly across its arc. The governor was working. The constant speed mechanism was functioning exactly as designed. They shut down the engine and stood in silence, exhausted beyond words. Hurricane L-1842 was now the first operational fighter command aircraft to carry an unauthorized constant-speed propeller. Whether it would save lives or simply prove that two men could break regulations remained to be seen. The morning briefing would begin in 2 hours. The German raiders were expected before noon. Flight Lieutenant David Stone would be flying L-1842 into combat, and he would have no idea that his aircraft was different from every other Hurricane in the sky. Tommy had no way to warn him. He could only watch and pray that their 36 hours of work would not end in tragedy. David Stone noticed something different the moment his Hurricane left the ground. The engine responded like a living thing, smooth and eager, pulling him into the sky with a power he had never felt before. He checked his instruments twice, certain something must be wrong. But the oil pressure was steady, the temperature normal, the revolutions exactly where they should be. Whatever had changed, it was not showing any warning signs that he did not have time to think about it further. The controller's voice crackled through his headset with the clipped urgency that meant trouble. 30-plus bandits at Angels 20, heading northwest toward Dover. All available aircraft were ordered to intercept. Stone formed up with the rest of the squadron at 15,000 feet. Below them, the English Channel glittered in the morning sun like a sheet of hammered metal. Above them, somewhere in the haze, 30 German Bf-109s were waiting to kill them. The climb began. Stone had done this 100 times before, and every time it ended the same way. At 18,000 feet, the Hurricanes would start to struggle. At 20,000, the engines would be gasping. At 22,000, if they pushed that far, the aircraft would be wallowing on the edge of a stall while the 109 circled effortlessly above them, choosing their moment to dive. But today was different. At 18,000 feet, Stone's engine was still pulling strong. At 20,000, he was still climbing at nearly 2,000 feet per minute. He glanced at the other Hurricanes in his formation and saw them falling behind, their props clawing at the thin air while his aircraft continued upward as if gravity had taken the morning off. The radio burst with confused chatter. Squadron Leader Price was calling for a status check. 2 pilots reported engine trouble and were turning back. The others were straining to maintain altitude. Stone kept climbing. At 23,000 feet, he could see the German formation clearly. They were arranged in a loose defensive circle, their standard tactic for engaging slower British fighters. The lead 109 pilot had probably already selected his first target, confident that the Hurricanes would top out well below him. Stone's altimeter read 24,000 feet. Then 25. He was above them now, looking down at the black crosses on their wings, and for the first time since the war began, he felt something other than fear. That he pushed his stick forward and dove. The 109 pilots never saw him coming. Stone came out of the sun at nearly 400 miles per hour, his 8 Browning machine guns tearing a 3-second burst through the nearest German fighter. The 109 shed pieces of wing and canopy before rolling into a fatal spin. Stone pulled up hard, the blood draining from his head as the G-forces pressed him into his seat, and found himself behind a second 109 that was desperately trying to turn away. Another burst. Another kill. The German formation scattered. Stone climbed again, his engine howling with power that seemed impossible, and picked his next target. A 109 was diving toward the channel, trying to escape. Stone followed, matching the Germans' descent foot for foot, something no Hurricane had ever done before. At 12,000 feet, he closed to 200 yards and fired until the 109 streamed black smoke and plunged into the sea. 3 kills in 4 minutes. Stone had never achieved anything like it. When he landed at Hornchurch, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely unbuckle his harness. He climbed out of the cockpit and stood on the wing, staring at his aircraft as if seeing it for the first time. The ground crew approached cautiously, uncertain what to make of the pilot's expression. Then Stone saw Tommy Marsh standing at the edge of the dispersal area. The fitter's overalls were stained with oil, and his eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that Stone recognized immediately. "What did you do to my aircraft?" Stone asked. The question silenced everyone within earshot. Tommy stepped forward slowly, his jaw set with determination that barely masked his fear. "We modified the propeller, sir. Constant speed governor. It lets the engine perform at full efficiency at any altitude." "We?" Who else was involved? Edwin Parrish emerged from behind a fuel bowser, where he had been watching the confrontation unfold. Before Tommy could answer, Squadron Leader Price arrived, his face dark with fury. Behind him came Flight Lieutenant Burton, already reaching for his notebook to document the violation. "You will explain yourselves immediately," Price said. "And then you will explain why I should not have you both arrested." Tommy stood at attention, his voice steady despite everything. "With respect, sir, I can explain. But first, you should know that Flight Lieutenant Stone just shot down 3 109s at 25,000 feet. No hurricane has ever done that before." The silence that followed was absolute. Price looked at Stone, who nodded slowly, still trying to process what had happened in the sky above the channel. "3 confirmed kills," Stone said. "I was above them, sir. I was actually above them." Price stared at the hurricane, then at Tommy, then at Edwin. The anger in his face was giving way to something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show me exactly what you did." 6 weeks later, Tommy stood in a hangar that had been transformed into a factory floor. 12 Hurricanes were lined up in 2 rows, each one surrounded by teams of fitters and civilian engineers working with desperate efficiency. The conversion that had taken him and Edwin 36 hours to complete on a single aircraft was now being performed across every fighter station in southern England. Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister of Aircraft Production, had ordered the modification program on June 22, the same day France signed its surrender to Germany. By August 16, over 1,000 Spitfires and Hurricanes had received constant speed propellers. They had barely finished in time. The German assault began on August 13, a day the Luftwaffe commanders called Adler Tag, Eagle Day. Over 1,500 German aircraft crossed the channel in waves, targeting RAF airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. It was the largest aerial attack in history, designed to destroy fighter command in a single overwhelming blow. Tommy watched the Hurricanes take off that morning and felt something he had not experienced since the war began: genuine hope. The aircraft climbing into the August sky were not the same machines that had struggled over Dunkirk. They were faster in the climb, more responsive in combat, capable of meeting the Bf-109s on equal terms for the first time. The news came back in fragments throughout the day. A Polish pilot named Wojciech Jankowski shot down 2 109s over Kent before his own aircraft was damaged. He nursed his Hurricane back to Hornchurch with half his rudder missing and oil streaming from his engine, but he was alive. A Canadian volunteer named Robert McPherson accounted for 3 German bombers and a 109 before running out of ammunition. He landed with exactly 4 gallons of fuel remaining, and David Stone, flying his 7th mission of the day, engaged a formation of 12 109s single-handed over the Thames estuary. He destroyed 2 and damaged a third before breaking off when his guns jammed. The combat report noted that his Hurricane had climbed to 27,000 feet during the engagement, an altitude that would have been impossible 3 months earlier. The price was terrible. 11 pilots from Hornchurch alone did not return that day. Tommy knew their names, knew their voices, knew which ones took sugar in their tea and which ones had photographs of sweethearts tucked into their cockpits. He helped remove personal effects from the lockers of men who would never need them again, but the ratio had changed. Before the conversion, Fighter Command was losing 3 pilots for every German aircraft destroyed. Now the numbers were nearly even. The Luftwaffe was taking casualties it could not sustain, and its commanders did not understand why. On August 18, Tommy received an unexpected visitor. Edwin Parrish arrived at the hangar looking thinner than Tommy remembered, his persistent cough now accompanied by dark circles under his eyes. He had been traveling between stations for weeks, training conversion teams and solving technical problems that arose with each new installation. "Word came through this morning," Edwin said quietly. "My brother is alive. Prisoner of war camp in Germany. He'll spend the rest of the war behind barbed wire, but he'll survive it." Tommy gripped Edwin's shoulder. There were no adequate words for what they had shared, no way to express what their 36 hours in a darkened hangar had meant. They had broken rules, risked their careers, and quite possibly helped save their country. History would never record their names. The pilots would receive the medals and the glory. But Tommy found he did not mind. That evening, he walked to a small church near the airfield where a memorial board listed the names of pilots who had died since the war began. The list was long and growing longer. Tommy read each name carefully, remembering faces, voices, moments of laughter in the dispersal hut and moments of terror in the sky. That he thought about what Squadron Leader Price had said after reviewing the combat reports from the past week. "We gave them a fighting chance," Price had told Tommy privately. "That's all anyone can do. Give them a chance." Outside the church, the summer evening was warm and still. In the distance, Tommy heard the familiar rumble of Merlin engines. Another patrol was taking off, another group of young men climbing into the sky to face an enemy that still outnumbered them 3-1. But the machines they flew were no longer inadequate. The gap in the sky had been closed. Tommy watched the hurricanes rise until they became small dark shapes against the fading light. The Battle of Britain was not over. It would continue for months, claiming lives that could never be replaced, testing the courage of a nation that refused to surrender. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Tommy allowed himself to believe that the sacrifice had meaning. The forbidden modification had become the standard. The 36 hours of secret work had become 1,000 conversions across fighter command. 2 men breaking rules in a darkened hangar had helped give Britain's defenders the tools they needed to survive. Tommy turned away from the church and walked back toward the hangars. There were more aircraft waiting to be serviced, more conversions to complete, more work to be done. The war would not wait for anyone, but for the first time since it began, Tommy believed they might actually win.